So good morning and good afternoon to our attendees on the West Coast. Thank you for joining our Reimagine Talent webinar today. My name is Jessica Oberto, Director of Process and Implementation at People Science. If this is your first time joining us or you aren't familiar with us yet, People Science provides talent acquisition advisory services, recruitment process partnering, recruitment placement services, and a proprietary software, HireGate, our HR technology that augments any applicant tracking system and provides recruitment data and AI-driven insights. You can visit us at people-science.com to learn more, or reach out if you have any questions or you'd like to schedule a complimentary strategy session with us. So you'll find that throughout our webinars, they're more conversational between our panel. If at any point today you'd like to include something or ask a question, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to make sure that we get back to you. So now I will move on and introduce our speakers for today. So first, I'd like to introduce our host, Christine Nicholas, founder and CEO of People Science and HireGate. A visionary in the talent acquisition industry and a widely respected thought leader in all aspects of recruiting, Christine founded People Science to help companies solve their toughest hiring challenges and transform how they acquire talent they need today and in the future. And since 1997, Christine has led the development of cutting-edge information systems, processes, and methodologies within TA, as well as the development of our software HireGate. And on to our special guest for this month, Diana Frascella, VP of Global Talent Acquisition at DraftKings. Diana was also the Senior Director of TA at TripAdvisor prior to DraftKings, where she built out TripAdvisor's campus recruiting program. She's a dedicated TA professional with a global focus on hiring top talent specializing in tech recruiting. She has a strong background in both financial services and technology. Experienced in leading global teams, Diana is passionate about fostering relationships with universities, clients, and leadership teams. Her expertise spans across TA strategy, technical recruiting, employment branding, and career development. So welcome, Diana. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And it's good to see everybody here. I know that we have created quite a following, so I want to say thank you to the followers and a little apologetic that summer was a little wonky. I think we missed the month of maybe August, Jess, and then jump back in September. So it's great to be back and so much to talk about. Really happy to have Diana on. We've had a couple of, and right, we're in season, right? We're in season for DraftKings. So I think that's pretty cool. So really excited. What a story she has too. I'm not going to steal the thunder, but just before we get to her, talk about, I think as TA leaders, we sometimes walk around saying, oh, I've got this challenge. We just did a merger. Some of the things that Diana was explaining. And by the way, Diana, the way you explained it, oh, well, we're in 2 war-torn countries. We've gone from 1,000 employees to 5,000 in 5 years. I joined the company in COVID. There, I'm just stealing your thunder. But truth out, I think some of us get up in the morning and saying, how am I going to handle this? I don't know, maybe you should call Diana because it's pretty extraordinary, right? So thank you for coming. So let's look at some of the stats first. And anytime, Jess and Diana, anytime you want to join in. And I also welcome comments. Some of this data is pretty intense. I know some of this hits pretty hard to some of us in TA, given the recent economy and the things that are going on in talent acquisition. And for those of you who are unemployed that are followed, stick with us. Always a good networking way to get around things. But I think the more educated we stay about employment, the employment ecosystem, as we're calling it these days, not only is it good for us and for our organizations and it's our jobs, but truth out has a huge effect on the way we live our lives and on the population as a whole. So national unemployment rate for October, you can see a little bit of a dip from August, but maintaining September and October. November hasn't come out yet. I think it'll be interesting to see where we are in November. But as we talk further today, I think you'll get a feeling for where we think we might be. So there we are on unemployment. Let's take a look at a part of the JOLTS report, which is our jobs added. So jobs added for the month previous. So where are we? So for September was, and I think this is a good graph. The reason that I pulled this one is to show that we are seeing a decline. Now we still have less than 1 person per open position, right? So we're at like 0.9. But we are seeing a decline in job openings. It'll be interesting to see what happens in January of this year. Although I do think AI played a big part in the decline that we start to see come into play here. January, February, March. March, I think, would be reflective of what was happening more in January and February. It'll be interesting to see how this continues or if it plateaus at some point. But there we are right now at adding 7,443. So that's 3,000 positions or 7 million. Okay, Jess. I'm not going to delve too much into what has been going on with all the other employment stats. I think that the news is doing, the media is doing a great job of circulating that, right? However, this month, the BLS did print their industry and occupational employment projections overviews from 2023 to 2033. So this is a report that, having been around the block a while here, I do follow closely when it comes out. And I think what's interesting, and Jess and I were just talking about this, is that if you look at the projections that the BLS made from 2013 to 2023, you'll see that they were pretty on the money. If you go back and compare what their projections of growth were, they were pretty much on the money. At the same time, I'll also say, and we'll take a look in a second, the projected growth by sectors, by occupations, is very close to what they projected it would be. We are going to see a slowdown. So the growth rate from 2013 to 2023 was 13.7%, which is an historical landmark in many, many ways. At the same time, their projections for the upcoming 10 years drops to 4%. And I think probably, so we'll go from 1.67 million to 174 million, considerably lower. And I wanted to use this chart to show, yeah, it's lower, but look, it still is continued growth. So we're not looking at upside down. We're not looking at a market crash for employment. We're not making any kind of presumption that we're going to see a drop in employment, but it is going to slow down. And I think it's interesting, this statement: the slower employment growth is a result of an expected slowdown. This was projected all the way back from the previous 10 years, going back to 2013, in the civilian population growth, subsequently a slower labor force and growth. So I think as we travel through the next 10 years, or even just get through this month, as TA professionals, as HR professionals, what we need to understand and really embrace is there can be a lot of things thrown into this mix. But if we look historically, this is because there is a slowdown in our population. And there's some of us who've been on this bandwagon, and thank you, followers, because I do get a lot of comments about this, that have been saying since the early 2000s, employment and labor and how we source talent and how we secure talent and how we retain them has a direct effect on our GDP. And honestly, I don't know about you, Diana, and Jess, I don't think that's reflected well enough. I don't think the general population understands that. And I also think our industry, right? So the talent acquisition industry and HR, I don't think we've embraced that enough to say, where do we go from here? Because I think it's pretty obvious if we think this through. If we don't have enough talent coming in, and our GDP is going to drop, and the talent that we have now is suppressed in the respect that they cannot be elevated out of entry-level positions, or if they want to leave a production environment, they really can't. There isn't a societal change that will uplift them. So when we look at our immigration rules and things that are happening, how are we going to populate the US to keep the GDP growing? To me, this is a very important point. And shout out to us, shout out to you. We need to get our voices heard all the way up through Washington, not just to get on the bandwagon about immigration. I'm not going to get political here, but what I am going to say is we own this. If you've been in talent acquisition or HR for a year, you know more than 99% of the country about how talent works. And I think that voice is not heard enough, and our experiences aren't heard enough. So however we come up with whatever solution, a lot of it depends on us. Would you agree, Diana?
100%. 100%.
Yeah, so why don't you go to Washington next week and see if you can. No, but there are collectives. I think Sharm's trying to do something about this, but I do think our voices over the next couple of years need to be heard. And we always talk about getting to the table. Well, maybe we need to talk about the bigger topics to get to the table. Some of this is risky, and some of it's not going to be received well in smaller companies, or it could be in a smaller company, but not so much at the top of others. But it's time to be that catalyst for change. If not now, then when are we going to get involved? Okay, Jess, you want to flip to and we'll be sharing this deck, correct, Jess?
Yes.
So these are some snapshots from the occupational report that came out from the BLS. If you're interested, I always think it's interesting. Again, this really does emulate what they projected the previous 10 years. And it's always healthcare, it's always computers, it's always more healthcare, community service, social services, more healthcare at the top, and life sciences. So we don't see a big change here, but we see this continued growth rate coming. So if you're wondering, if you're in TA, wondering where you need to go, if you're managing TA and saying, how do we need to position ourselves? Your EVP is going to be really important in understanding the challenges based on where you are, where your segments are. The other, I was very surprised to see this, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics has come out with projections of what they are saying artificial intelligence, how it will affect the workplace. To me, this is probably the bravest statement I've ever seen because there's so many variables inside AI. But I was happy to see it because there are so many organizations that are looking for guidance. And I know of one or two, I'm going to say two, in the Fortune 50 that I think are making inroads when considering their business. But if we look at what's been happening since ChatGPT really started to take a grip a year and a half ago, what we're seeing is how can we even project how this is going to affect or not affect us? So the BLS is using historical data to create projections. That's what they always use. Typical, as in technology projections, growth is relatively slow, resulting in slow job growth, right? So if you've got slow growth in a sector, such as computers coming in, you can predict it easier. And then you have slower job growth, so you can manage it easier. The BLS assumes that the overall pace of technology change will be consistent with past experiences. So all of the stats that you're going to see now are using historical data. And then they've got this other big line, big disclaimer, that there are times when these market shifts come because of a specific technology. And then their next line is, there's no historical data utilized in the projection of the AI effects. So even though there's a lot of other data that's used to populate it, we don't have historical data. To me, this is kind of like a CYA from the BLS. Like we don't really know what's going to happen. They also go so far as to say, these are the titles, job titles and occupations going from 23 all the way to 2033 that are going to see the biggest impact. It's actually much more hopeful if you read the article than you would suspect. Jess has gone ahead and pulled out some of these for us. So legal occupations, paralegals, 14 out of 22 is arts, design, entertainment, and media. Graphic designers are 511 out of 832. So there's a considerable amount. The bolded ones are on here. They're in the deck, but you can shoot over to the BLS anytime to see what the projection is. What was most interesting to me this morning is, I think it was Business Index came out with a proclamation today that there has been a significant drop-off in the growth rate of AI. Can you put your hand up if you read this morning? Because I think it's really interesting. So what they're saying is ChatGPT in particular, and then the others behind it, have seen a significant slowdown. And they're attributing much of the slowdown not to the development phase, but the amount of intelligence that we now have available to us to build it into AI. Which again, many of us have been saying this, especially in HR, which HR has good records, right? But over in the talent acquisition side, we just don't have enough data. I mean, I don't know anybody who says, yeah, I'm great, I have enough data, I don't need more data. Or my data is so low, right? And we've had this conversation, right? My data is so well organized. If you have the data, then AI can propel in all kinds of ways, and then the machine learning can kick in. But once the data runs dry, which the BLS has gone so far as to say, by 2028, we will, no, I'm sorry, not the BLS, but the predictors of GPT are saying is by 2028, we're going to run out of data. Which is a little surprising to me because I thought we might run out sooner. I mean, how much text do we have? And the term that they actually use is text. You know what, Jess? I'll supply the link to you so we can send that out to this article,
Okay.
But certainly worth noting. What I will say from a market perspective, as far as the employment economy and the way that Jess and I and others at People Science are observing, is we're seeing companies who had gone into kind of deer in the headlights. What is AI going to do? And let's slow down on who we're hiring because we don't even know how this is going to affect our products. To, okay, we're getting there. And I think now we're going to see some stability. We're already seeing a little bit of stability, I think, in notably in the end of November, December, certainly coming off an election year too. And by the way, very surprised how these numbers have held true through an election. This is the first presidential election that I've seen the market stay steady and the employment not change so much. So I think maybe we're starting to see that segregate. But in any case, as AI becomes more of an everyday term, and as we understand some of the weaknesses and that growth rate starts to slow, I think companies are becoming more confident, saying we can't hold our products any longer. We need to make motions without this. So good indicators of what's happening. And then last and finally, before we get on with our chat, HR Drive came out with an article that is entitled 4 Employment Actions to Expect Under a Second Trump Presidency. This was printed on November 6th, and I think it's well done. Number 1, immigration enforcement raids will be back on the table. Immigration reform will be a priority. At the worksite, a second Trump term will likely turn to supply side enforcement of immigration law and worksite, meaning raids in which the government officials arrive at the site with the intention of arresting undocumented workers will likely be used again. So word of caution, I know that there are organizations, especially in the temporary usage world, that have said things point blank. It's saving me $3 million to use undocumented workers through a temp agency, so I can survive a fine of $1.5 million. This is a true story that happened 2 years ago. Somebody you were talking to. If you're still in that headset, I think I'd be very cautious moving forward because I think we're going to see a lot more stringency there, especially as I've seen that focus and when at the previous Trump presidency start to focus on temporary usages and contractors. And even the states are starting to take a closer look at contractors. Agency chairs would be replaced. And the things that we're hearing are pretty much what was expected. Surely Marvin Kaplan is going to be the pick for National Labor Relations Board. And we know his background, we know what his thought process is. And similarly at the EEOC, it'll probably be Commissioner Andrea Lucas again. These are Republican commissioners working under pretty much the same concepts that they did previous to the Biden administration. Regulatory activity will slow considerably. We saw this happen the last time. I don't know if executive orders will come out again. I do know that the overtime rules and the non-competes and the independent contractor rules that today are really being challenged in many of the courts. I think you're going to see the courts walk away. I think we're going to see that change. And I think you're going to see a lot of that scaled back. So everything that we've kind of seen growth in the last 4 years is going to go into another direction. Not anything new when we see parties change at the presidency level. Okay. And then last and foremost, love comments on this if you want to put them in the chat. Limitations on DEI could be put in place. DEI is one area where day one on the initial Trump presidency, around day one, it was one of the first executive orders to change, to be put in place. It was contested. I think we're going to see DEI be challenged considerably, especially when it comes to education and training and how it plays out in the employment sector. So lots of changes coming our way between AI, slow growth, people leaving the market, not enough people coming in, new administration, training, all these things. It's a very exciting time, right? So with that, let me just bring us back to Diane again. So Diane, I know I kind of stole your thunder because I wanted the audience to understand why we're so excited to have you a little bit. But so tell us about what this journey for you has been like.
I mean, it's been great. So I've been at DraftKings for almost 5 years. And like sort of Christine mentioned previously, right, I joined 2 weeks before COVID hit. At the time, DraftKings was just about 1,000 people, not public. And within that year of starting, we went public. We acquired a company on the day we went public, which doubled us in size. So overnight, we went from about 1,000 employees to over 2,000. We went from being a U.S. Really based company only to now having half of our employee population sit in really Eastern Europe. And then since then, we've just continued to either add products, go live in more states in the US, and just grow our population. So we are right now currently at about 5,000 global employees spread over, multiple countries and in multiple offices.
Wow.
For those of you who aren't familiar with DraftKings, just so it's like, who are we talking about? Where we consider ourselves sports entertainment. So we offer products such as daily fantasy platform, sports betting, online casino, lottery. We also have a media arm where we produce our own content, shows, podcasts, either about sporting, sports or sports betting.
So kind of across the whole media sector and technology.
Yes, and so sports entertainment / tech company.
So what's the makeup of the staff at DraftKings? Is that what kind of people?
I would say almost a third of our workforce falls into that tech and product employee population. And then from there, we also have, I would say almost a third of our workforce is very customer focused. So whether that's our customer service individuals, people working in our sports books, our hosts to our customers. And then the other third is more traditional marketing, G&A, and those type of functions.
So across the board, but media included. So that's pretty interesting in itself.
Yeah.
And overall, like if you had to say, this is what you see in the recruiting market for DraftKings in particular, do you think that it's going to be easier or harder, about the same over, let's say, the next 5 years?
I think it's going to be different. So I think that it's always challenging, I think depending on who you're looking for, the markets you're looking for. But I do think, right, with some of the things you talked about with, less available talent in the market, it's really going to continue to be competitive to find those great people. So I do think that's going to be challenging. And I think as AI plays a bigger role in many jobs, it's going to be thinking about the skills that we need today for our employees may be very different than the skills we need 3 years from now. And I don't view AI as, going to take away people and we're not going to need people. I think it's just the shift of what our employees are working on may change over time. And that requires us to potentially look for different people in the market or figure out how we're going to make sure we can up-level our own employees and our internal talent. Like, how do we give them the skills to continue to be successful in this new age of AI?
Which is such a, I think it's probably one of the most popular terms we hear these days is upskill, upskill, upskill. And everybody's running around, okay, how do I do that? And there's some technologies coming out around it too. So you grew by 1 or 2 acquisitions too, right?
So we grew by one very large acquisition. So that was SB Tech about 5 years ago. And then we've continued to grow by smaller acquisitions, over the course of the last 4 years, with the most recent one being this summer's when we acquired a company called Jackpocket.
Yeah, that was pretty exciting, right? You had talked to me a couple times too about what it's like to work you're in Ukraine?
Yes.
And Israel.
Yep. So our Eastern European operations are Ukraine, Bulgaria, and Israel.
So let's take the most dangerous places in the world. And really, you've done a great job with that, right? How is that going? And how are you doing? How are you recruiting there? How are you maintaining them? What do you do to support them?
Yeah, it's right. Like prior to my time at DraftKings, I had worked in Western Europe primarily, or APAC. So like Eastern Europe has been a new sort of population for me in my career, which has been great. I think it's, in those 3 locations, it's just, really making sure you come in and be culturally sensitive, right? There are things, that are very different about every office we have and sort of what makes it different and what makes it similar, right? And I think we've spent a lot of time focusing on, 80% of the things work for everyone. And then how do we be really specific in each of these countries and like addressing what our population there needs. And then especially for Ukraine and Tel Aviv, it's just being very, supportive of, understanding that our employees and their families and like what they're going through. what we found overwhelmingly is that work is an outlet for them to sometimes, you know, just like a distraction. And that we have people who like, you know, are very committed to DraftKings and have been very encouraging that we want you to still employ us here. And we want to continue to hire, you know, as needed. I mean, we have slowed down hiring in the Ukraine. It's more based on backfills and sort of keeping the population we have. And then providing them, you know, whether it's a WeWork space or, you know, generators for their houses, or, you know, providing some of those I consider like benefits or extras that not all our employees need, but might be specific to that population. Same thing in Tel Aviv, right? When, you know, depending where people live, we've offered, you know, assistance in getting hotels in safer areas in Israel. And the same thing, we obviously accommodate when people need to leave to go do their military service, or understanding when people's family members are being deployed, and adjusting, you know, work schedules as needed, and really just trying to, you know, do whatever we can to support our employees there, knowing that, you know, they can do what they can from a work perspective, but the number one priority is the safety of them and their families.
Any concerns that if Ukraine loses the war, what the ramifications might be for DraftKings? The same thing in Israel with all the contention there.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we think about that a lot. And I think it's just thinking about either how can we, one, think about our employees? Is there relocation strategies for the people who may want to relocate if we can't operate in those countries anymore? But then also thinking if, you know, we have 300 employees in Ukraine and they're all engineers and they focus on these skills, where else could we find those skill sets, right? Where would we want to rebuild those teams, whether it's in a different country, or do we add to our teams in Bulgaria or Canada or the US or Ireland or wherever we may be? So I think that's the conversation. Like, if we were no longer to be able to employ people in this market, like where is the talent drain going to be? And like, how do we replace that?
And do you have products and services in those countries too, or just?
No, so that's what's interesting about us. We only are a consumer brand in the US and Canada, but we have employees there. So that also is interesting from a recruiting standpoint, because we have a consumer brand when we're recruiting talent in the US and Canada. When we recruit in Europe, we really don't have that consumer brand. So it's much more starting from like, you know, we're DraftKings, let us explain who we are, versus a lot of our candidates in the US obviously know who we are.
And you have recruiters in those countries, right?
Yes.
So it's not like you're trying to do this from the US. They understand
No,
the sentiment.
I mean, that would be, I think it would be extremely hard from time differences and just cultural differences. I think it's much easier when we're going back and forth with Western Europe and US, like, right, our recruiters in Dublin, our recruiters, you know, they can help support US roles. Our US recruiters can help support London and Dublin hiring. But we really, you know, I think it would become more challenging if we were trying to do all our recruiting from the US in countries like Bulgaria and Ukraine and Israel.
So just shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious too, what is the tech stack? Can you kind of give us an idea of the whole thing, your backroom, HRIS, all the way through, and even the point systems that you might be using?
Yeah, so what we use from a people standpoint, so we are a Workday shop. So we use that for all of our people systems, including our ATS. We've had it for about going on 4 years now. And what was interesting when we did our implementation of Workday is, you know, we were getting larger. We needed, you know, bigger systems to be able to support us. But we had, for once we acquired SB Tech, we continued to operate on their systems, and we continued to operate on DraftKings legacy systems. So we were operating out of like 2 HR systems and 2 ATSs. So when we went to Workday, we had to sort of combine all of them. So for us in TA, it was, we were taking Lever, which we used here, and then they used a system called CoMeet, and having to take both of our legacy ATSs and move them to Workday's ATS.
And I think you joined, but for those Workday viewers, we do have a Workday practice group for TA leaders that are, it's a good knowledge share. Have you joined any of those yet, Diana? Have you been on any?
I've not been able to join any.
Yeah.
But
I
I
think
think they're on my list to do.
Yeah, I think one of the people from the group connected with you. Anyway, it's a good group. It's a good way to sound things out. Either Jess or Lindsay or I facilitate that, and it's been interesting. because I think the Workday product is an ATS. And it could use some work. And I think that the shares in there, there's no obligation, but it's good to, I think, to see other people in there. So
And I think what we found is we implemented it, and from day one of using it, it's just a constant sort of improvements or changing, or you get it in place and then you realize, oh, we could have set this up differently. So I feel like for the last 4 years, it's almost nonstop sort of little tweaks or changes that we need, or then also Workday's having new releases come out. So
the first time I heard the term, our second implementation, was in the Workday group. And I'm like, is this like a thing? Like there's a second implement, and I noticed that others used it too. So it's like you get the Workday implementation and then you hire the consultant. And that's what this team was talking about, like
I'm waiting for the day that like we could just be like, Workday is perfect. We never have to make any more changes and we'll just use it like this, but that hasn't happened yet.
So what are some of the point systems that you use alongside Workday?
Sorry, some of the what?
Some of the search tools that you might use, or I call them point systems, like what's your background checking, I think going into next year, a lot of our viewers are looking at what is my tech stack, what am I going to do, what am I budgeting for? So I think it'd be interesting hearing what you use.
Yep. So we, from a TA perspective, we use Beamery. So that is, layers over our Workday ATS. So we're using that as our CRM, which has been great for us because obviously using, Workday's ATS just doesn't have the same capabilities. So from a CRM, we like it. We also do all of our, email marketing and all of that through Beamery. We are currently in the process of signing a contract with JD Expert that we're excited about, and that's going to be able to house like all of our job descriptions. And what it does is, it can track revisions, and it helps with sort of skill-based hiring, and it can also tie into Workday, and it can end up being a product that not only for TA to use, but your comp and benefits team can use it, and our HRBPs, because it's really tracking like job profiles and job descriptions of all your.
Who is that again? I didn't catch the name.
JD Expert.
JD Expert?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of it. We pretty much know them all, so that's interesting.
Yep. So, and then we're also in final talks with Paradox, which we're looking to again sit on top of Workday to just help with some of our scheduling needs, texting needs for candidates, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think Eileen Kovalsky, I think she's on. If you're there, Eileen, put your arm up. But she's head of TA operations. Like there she is. She's head of TA operations at General Motors, and she just spoke at the Gardner, and she was at Workday Rising. She's part of our Workday group, and what GM is coming out with. I'm not going to steal your thunder, Eileen, but it's pretty interesting. But talking about AI, and they use Paradox to get them there. So their application process starts on the phone, their hire ends at the phone. Everything is done mobilely, and then the candidate shows up. This is unique in any part of the world. I know it's been like a 2-year implementation. And I think Eileen, you're going live January 1. I think that's when they're slated, but interesting. We'll have Eileen on in January after it goes live and see what happens, or January or after. But an interesting story. And also, is that where we're going, right? Is this, and how does that, what sectors will you be able to deal with? So I think that in itself is its own webinar. And it's interesting too, right? Because what Workday lacks in the TA module, right? Because when we look at Workday and how does they get in there? It's the only ATS that I know that I get a call from like the executive vice president of HR and says, in 2 weeks, we're going to be a Workday shop, and never saw it coming because they aren't often invited into the conversation. It happens in at the CEO level, it seems. You got to give accolades to how they sell. But that the talent acquisition module, I don't think they make it a secret, is included, but it's kind of an afterthought. So I'm saying in this respect, sending, thank yous out to Workday, because it is causing things like Paradox and other point systems to step their game up to enhance that system. And, my high horse on that is always that it's an applicant tracking system. It's not supposed to fix your world. It's supposed to track applicants. It is not supposed to source applicants. It is not supposed to track your recruiter production. Everybody's always angry with their applicant tracking system, right? And I was like, well, as soon as you talked about it, it tracks applicants. It's not supposed to do all these other things. So other platforms, by the way, HireGate's a good platform. I had to say that because it's our HireGate. But I welcome anybody taking a look at that because it does augment Workday pretty well. Any other point systems you're like, yeah, this is a good one, or anything new on the horizon?
The other one that we're rolling out that's new, that's not as much to TA right now, but we're actually demoing it and starting with Texio to actually help us write performance reviews. And then I think we're thinking about, right, how could at some point those help us with the job descriptions? But I'm also interested in seeing if there's a way that it can help with when people write feedback on candidates. So similar to performance reviews, or we do 360 feedback as part of our performance cycle, like I think it would also be amazing as a tool to help interviewers and hiring managers when they're writing their feedback on candidates, right? Like give them ideas of where are you missing things, or this, this is aggressive terminology, or, was there anything positive? Like I'm interested to see if there is a way for Texio to help us sort of help our interviewers and hiring managers write better, more relevant feedback on candidates.
One of the things, and if you can get there, and maybe we have some ideas for you about that, but at using HireGate, so what the HireGate tracks all of the interview process, right? And then we were able to, and this was it was on the roadmap for like 6 months out. So our lead developer happened to be on a call when we were talking about this, and within 24 hours using a new AI tool that we had, he was able to create candidate overviews based on the interview, which is saving about 4 hours per recruiter on 3 of our engagements, 4 hours a week, right? Because all they do is push a button, it populates the candidate overview and says, why I'm sending you this, Mr. Hiring Manager, Mrs. Hiring Manager. And then, you throw a little bit more chat GPT in there and it's this eloquent document.
Exactly.
It eliminates that repetitiveness, right? So I'm doing the interview, I'm taking the notes, now I've got to take it, remember everything I said, look at my notes and report. This push a button does the whole thing. Amazing.
Right. That is nice.
It is amazing. So those things are out there. I'm not sure what Texio is and what they're doing, where you're plugged in, but it's out there. And it's amazing how one little tool created in less than 24 hours can affect
save that amount of time for your recruiters.
It's amazing. So what would you say are some of your biggest wins?
So I think one of our biggest wins over the last, I'd say 2 years, is really the creation of our EVP. And that's like a huge shout out to my recruitment marketing team and my entire team, because it was a labor of love to get to where we are today. But right prior to us creating an EVP, we really, when I think about our recruiting team and like why people would want to join DraftKings, there really was no distinction between who DraftKings was as a consumer brand and maybe who we are as an employee brand. And that, created challenges over the years for us because, DraftKings customers, yes, we have lots of DraftKings customers who probably now work at DraftKings, but we also needed people who were not customers, right? We wanted diversity of thought. And our customers are primarily male, in their 20s to 40s, give or take, right? And we obviously wanted more females in things like that. So it's really important for us to figure out like who we are as an employee, what is the value prop for someone to want to come and work at DraftKings, and then why do you want to stay at DraftKings? So that was really almost like a 2-year project, is really figuring out. First, we spent a lot of time with our current employees and focus groups and sort of defining different segments of our population of like, why do you work here? What's exciting about the job? Like all of those things. And then sort of took it back and sort of figured out like, what is our EVP? And when it came to not only creating the EVP, that was also the refresh of our career site. So making our career site much more, aligned with like who we are as an employer, not who we are as a consumer. And I think it really shows, all our marketing materials, our career site, and, when you come to work here, it really shows like who we are, which is like, you don't need to love sports. You don't need to love sports betting. You like to be able to solve hard challenges. You need to be excited about, in some regards, creating a new industry in the US that didn't exist before. And, and that you come and work with a diverse group of people across the globe. And I think where we ended up is great. Like we use the crown is yours, which is our consumer brand logo, but it's also our employee value, like our EVP as well. And on our
What
career
was that
site,
again? What?
it's called the crown is yours, right?
The
So we
crown
really
is
play
yours.
on that, like, right, you can come and join DraftKings and like the future is yours. You can make your role what you want it to be.
That's interesting. And it's funny because we do a lot of work around EVP for customers, and Corn Ferry put out in their newsletter, I think 2 weeks ago, they had pulled like the top 5 progressions for next year, lack of a better term. And they said, I think number 4 was EVP comes of age. So we are getting, there was a lot of inquiries around EVP. I also think that now that we're out of kind of the panic, how do I fill these jobs, because things have slowed down a little bit, that we can get even better working on talent acquisition, not just putting out the fires and filling the jobs, right?
Exactly.
Right. But, so even though the amount of positions has slowed down, the market hasn't loosened up. It's not like there's a lot more,
No.
historically when that happens, there's a lot more people. Now there isn't. So now finally, I think we're seeing budgets come through to say, okay, we know that talent, we believe now that talent is, took a pandemic, but we now believe that talent is tight and getting dollars to support your efforts towards EVP. But the thing that's really interesting to me about yours is, you do have this really good brand as a consumer, but how important it is, right? To diversify from that in your EVP. Otherwise you look, that is interesting. I don't know anybody else who's looked into that. So kudos.
And our early, even though, because our career site, I think went live, our new refreshed career site about 9 months or a year ago. And even with just the new career site and a lot of our content we put out through our blogs and our podcasts, like we are seeing an increase in applicants per job. And we're seeing continued like quality of our applicants who are able to hire. So we do think that, it is showing a difference. And we're seeing, whether people are staying on the site longer or, more clicks on the site, which for us are all ways we're tracking, like, is our new EVP working? Is this content resonating with our candidates in the market? So.
Yes, and when if you can collect that micro data, like we do that.
Yeah.
It's no longer squishy science. It's no longer, we think that works.
Exactly.
Like when you can, and it's very hard with marketing to try and draw a correlation. We did this campaign, now we got a lot more people in.
Right.
The marketing people will tell you it was the campaign, the salespeople will tell you it's them. Upper management will say nobody knows. But when you can really get those metrics down and see it, I think the other thing is for somebody in your position too, how is this is really going to play out well? Because if you can show the correlation, you brought the idea of EVP, said it was going to works. Now you've got even more credibility to come to the table and say, this is what we need to build our, upskilling and building credibility. Yeah.
Yeah. And like what your point too, like even just having the data, and sometimes it's like you're making correlations, but the data behind it is so important, because I think that's what people here, especially working at a company like DraftKings, that is very analytical. And, it's like, regardless of what your role is or where you sit, like data is so important.
So what would you say has been your biggest lesson learned?
I would say to not underestimate how important face-to-face time is. And I say that in the context of having a dispersed team. So I have a 66-person team, and I have a large number of people who, don't sit in the Boston office and sit in Europe. And I think, during those years of COVID when traveling was very limited or we couldn't travel, I just think that it was very hard to bridge those cultural gaps. And it was very hard to like form really strong relationships that you need, sort of that trust and like, how are we going to work together? And I think, once we were able to travel, like actually spending time on the ground with people in their offices, in their world, has made all the difference in helping like grow a global TA team that is all really united and sort of working towards the same goal, and feels like we understand, what we're trying to do. Everyone is bought in, and everyone, is excited to be part of the team. And I think prior to being able to travel and spend that time on the ground with people and really listen and understand, and like, okay, now I get why, this is different, or why, this came across like this. I think we had a lot more miscommunication, mistrust, and, and quite frankly, like, I think our results weren't as good, either in terms of how we were hiring, our metrics, like number of hires, and it's just, and even the noise from the business, right? On like, why does this, why do you work like this here? And why do some people act like this? And, why isn't it consistent? And I think we've really been able to improve on all of those things in the last 2 years, when we've really doubled down on making sure we do have that time in person. And when we are together, making sure it's valuable time.
Wow, that is such an impactful statement, because everybody's still tackling with how much in office, it's not the same as traveling
Right.
together. Do you have a remote, like what is your remote policies at this point? Like how many people are
Yeah, so we have not brought people back to offices on a mandate. So right now it's very much flexible. Like during COVID, we probably hired almost a third of our workforce completely remote, so they're not even like close to an office. So we do think about, when is it important for them to come? Do we do offsites for teams? And then anyone who was located like close to an office within driving distance, they've really been given the option. Like you can be more of a hybrid schedule, come in 1 or 2 days a week, or if you prefer to continue to work remote, you can do that. And I would say most people who are within one of our offices probably do come in once or twice a week. And try to, like, our thing is make it meaningful when you come in. So if you're going to come in, see if if your team typically comes in on Wednesdays, and you should probably come in on Wednesdays, right? It's not going to be as productive for you to come in on Monday and sit by yourself or be in a conference room the whole time. So for our TA team, right, people tend to come in, in the Boston office more on like Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Our Vegas team like comes in Monday, Tuesdays, but still very flexible. So, and when we hire people, it's the same message, right? It's going to be what works for your schedule. And I feel like that's important as a TA leader and as, an HR professional, is because I do worry about when you mandate people back to an office 5 days a week, what do you lose in terms of diversity in your workforce, right? I think we found that maybe like if you live an hour outside the city and you're a working parent, those 2 hours a day commuting can be very difficult for you. But if you're able to work from home and only come in 1 or 2 days, we're still able to get that talent. Or in terms of, the population, for instance, of Boston is not overly ethnically diverse, right? So for us to say we have to make all our hires near the Boston office, right, we may be sacrificing on, the ability to hire, Black or Latino or, other ethnic groups that maybe just, the Boston population is limited.
being bound by the geography? How's it work with the remote workers then? Do they come? I mean, how do you keep face with them? I think that's the thing. After COVID, we did the same thing. And I know a lot of other organizations are like, okay, so we've got pockets of people here and some people here in the mountains, and, affordability wise, how do you pull all these people in?
Right. I think it depends like team by
Sorry.
team, right? Different teams have different, frequencies, but I do think it's more like figuring out with your team, is it quarterly? Is it twice a year that you're trying to bring people together to like either headquarters for us in Boston or, even in Europe, making sure like, where people from headquarters are traveling there. And that's the time that, anyone who's remote in Bulgaria potentially comes into the office. So it's definitely still a challenge. And what we have continued to focus on and will continue to focus on into 2025 is like, how do you continue to create that culture when you do have some employees remote, some employees coming in a hybrid world? Like, how do you still make sure everyone feels like this is who DraftKings is, this is what it's like working at DraftKings, and I feel connected to my peers, right? Because I think the data shows, if someone can say, I have a close relationship with at least one person on my team, like the likelihood they'll stay, XY number more months, like goes up significantly than if someone feels like they don't have connections to anyone. They're just sitting probably in their house, in the middle of nowhere. Like how
If
likely
their
are
work
they
buddy leaves, they become very vulnerable.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Or whole teams. I've seen whole teams, not for us,
Yeah.
but for other work. We've been very fortunate in that respect. I know we're trying to come up on this has been great. Such great information. Jess, we have some questions that people are directing specifically to Diana, I think, about EVP and things. Do you want to tackle those?
So someone asked Diana, in Workday, are you using their hiring solve solution? Are you familiar with that?
I am not familiar with that, so that makes me think we are not using it.
Okay. And then, so Marvin asked, how does your talent brand, so what your employees and applicants say about DraftKings, vary from your EVP? What's the difference there between what your talent brand is saying and what your EVP is saying to your candidates?
I guess
I think-
I guess I'm confused on the question. So this is probably me not understanding it, right? Like, I think our talent brands, like who we like go to market as and what our EVP is, how they differ.
Yes.
Yes.
So when you have employees that are talking about DraftKings or applicants that went through the interview process talking about DraftKings, is there any difference there between what you feel your EVP is also communicating out?
No, I feel like, yes, we get people who might, obviously we get Glassdoor reviews, not everyone's happy, but I do think, based on, the candidate surveys we do, like we continue to hear like, right, like, my interview process was challenging. I met very, people I feel like I can learn from. I met a variety of people on the team who I'd be excited to work with. Because really, like, my goal at the end of the day is like, regardless if you get the job at DraftKings or you choose to work at DraftKings, if you get an offer, it's more I want people to leave feeling like, oh, that would be a great place to work. And I'd want to recommend DraftKings to a friend or a family member. And I feel like we really haven't seen that big difference in what our candidates are saying versus what we're trying to tell people. And like, as a, sitting in recruiting for so long, like I would rather be honest about who we are as a company than try to sell something we're not. Because if someone gets in the door and looks around and they're like, wow, this isn't what I saw on all your materials or what you told me. And, one of the things that we are honest about still is like, right, and we do own it, right? Is like, you do come work at DraftKings, right? Like, we do still have more males that work at DraftKings than women, right? So if you're going to be on a team, like, you're not going to probably be on a team with all females. And like, but we are, infusing diversity into our workforce as best we can.
Okay. And then, you mentioned your EVP being specific to their North American candidates and then your candidates in Europe. Does your career website show those differences as well for North America versus Europe?
Yeah. So what we did for our especially for like our images and pictures and content, we actually took the time to do photo shoots in all of our different offices. So when you're on our career site, you're really seeing an array of our employees. So it's not like North America focused or Bulgarian focused. It's really trying to show you that global view. And then we do, our thing is like probably 80% is similar. And then you're going to have your 20% like cultural differences. And we try to highlight what some of those differences may be in different regions. And what we tried really hard to do, which I think prior to acquiring SB Tech and going public and now having a more distributed workforce, was that we were very US centric, right? And if you would come to our career site, I think it was definitely from the lens of not even US centric. I think we were Boston centric. And now I think we've really focused on really showing a global view of who we are.
Okay. And then I think we may have had a previous conversation about this, but as DraftKings was scaling, you had mentioned that the type of hires that you were making had changed. So what did you do in talent acquisition to make sure that you had the right talent skill sets of recruiters and sourcers in the seat to meet those needs?
Yep. So it has changed over the years of who we hire. And that's really been due to the large number of what we consider sort of high volume roles, like our customer service or like for fulfillment center workers or sportsbook work in our retail sports books, right? People who are standing on the floor for 8 hours, like more similar to someone who is working at like a Target or a place like that. And it's really been pivoting because it's a totally different type of recruiting, right? And it's not so much of, you're sending in mails on LinkedIn and you're going through Beamery and trying to find qualified, candidate who's very niche. Instead, it's like we're actually trying to cast a really wide net. And for those recruiters who are focusing on that population, it's almost like it's more programmatic. it's like a constant on, and it's like moving through talent very quickly. And, and the questions they ask and how they interview is very different than how our, tech recruiters screen candidates. So I think for us, it was looking for those different profiles for our recruiters, and we actually built out a team who really focuses on that. So over time, we've built a team that sits actually in our Las Vegas office who really handles that high volume. And it is it's a different market out there. We are able to find talent who is used to hiring, these higher volume roles.
Great. And then we have one last question from Kevin. So obviously, finding tech talent in the United States is super competitive. Is there anything different or special that your recruiting team does to really set themselves apart in the tech talent community? So any special networking events, organizations, any types of campaigns, anything that?
Yeah, so Kevin, you're right. Like I feel like the war for tech talent has been going on forever since I've been doing this, right? But some of the things that I think that we've done is we do partner with a couple sort of niche diversity organizations to really go after that, either female talent, especially on our engineering. So like a Women Impact Tech or Lesbians Who Code, organizations like that, to continue to build our brand in those communities. And then the other thing we've been doing is, from a recruitment marketing lens, is really building up our talent community and being able to send, continued touch points that really focus on this tech candidate. So it's not just talking about DraftKings, rah, this is what we do as a business, but really trying to be specific about, here's some blog posts talking about our tech stack. Here's, content with the latest technology we're using. So really trying to speak directly to those candidates and on a continued basis. So it's almost like warming up the talent over time to then help us, we may not be hiring them this year or next year, but maybe 3 years from now, when a job comes up and they're actually looking, they'll be like, oh, I've heard about DraftKings over this time. So instead of just that point in time, hey, I need to hire you today, we're really moving to the how do we create these talent community or this group of people that, like, over time we'll be able to hire from.
Excellent. And we have one last question. So I know we spoke about you're using Workday now. What ATS have you used in the past that you loved, you would recommend?
Greenhouse. I obviously, during the time when I had Greenhouse, I was like, oh, this is like so painful. But now, having the chance to have seen so many different ones, I still think Greenhouse would get the gold star from me.
And so we've operated in 40 some odd applicant tracking systems as an RPO partner, and HireGate's augmented maybe 30 some of those. I would answer that question and say, what kind of recruiting do you do? Because, and by the way, I would not negate some of the smaller ATSs that hit the market that are totally web enabled and pretty cutting edge. But I'd make sure that you get a really sound reference base from them. Greenhouse is a stellar performer in so many ways. Somebody just said, love Greenhouse. But Greenhouse also, it maybe not be the absolute best solution if you're doing tons of high volume, right? It's certainly in tech and engagement with your hiring managers, but there's other things. The other thing that I would definitely caution about, one of the discoveries, I think, turning into a tech company, as the guy, the buck stops here, with those ATSs that we partner, it is amazing to me how many are still operating on old SQL data from the late 90s and early 2000s. Amazing. So and you cannot shift that boat, right? So you need to have point systems that are going to, thank you, Eileen, that are going to, oh, she's talking about Greenhouse. Greenhouse is great for smaller companies that don't operate well in large enterprise organizations. It really does. I mean, our mid-markets and our smaller tech firms have done well. There's reasons why high tech and large tech, the Apples, the Meta,
do not use
go down that road. Right. So what a great time this has been. I know we only have a minute. We'd like to do last words. Jess, last words about today, anything?
I just loved hearing the story, Diana, how you kind of just jumped in there during like a challenging time of COVID, doubling your company and your TA staff. I think it's a really intriguing story of talent acquisition, and appreciate you sharing it today.
Diana, last words?
I'm just happy that I was invited to chat with both both of you today and all the people who joined. And I thought, you know, some of the insights you shared at the beginning were interesting, especially about sort of our GDPR and sort of what that's going to mean as our population changes over time or shrinks. So
I really want to thank you for being on today. It's been so great getting to know you, and you just make it look so effortless with all these huge accomplishments. I don't know if you're like panicking underneath and no one can tell, but you are really good at this. So thank you so much for being on. To the audience, thank you for hanging in there with us. We're a little bit slower in the summer. We certainly appreciate it. We love having you on. Remember how important our work is. Remember how important you are. Your voice matters. What you say affects not just our economy, not just how much people make, but really so much of our worth comes from our work. So thank you. Namaste, Diana. We're going to have you back on again. Everybody have a great holiday, and we'll see you in early December. Thank you.
Thank you.